Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Town Hall Tuesday, live from the Fox 13 Facebook page and here in the Fox 13 newsroom. We are delighted you are here, and we are delighted to introduce our guests tonight. In fact, we'll do that in just a second, but 1 week from today, the general election of 2020 will take place, and it has shaped up to be an election like no other. For one thing, it isn't just next Tuesday. Americans have actually been voting for at least a week now and will continue to do so, filling out their ballots and either mailing them in or dropping them off at collection boxes or at a polling place on election day itself. And of course, you can still show up at a polling place on election day and cast your ballot in person. And if you haven't registered to vote yet, we'll go over this during the course of this town hall. You can actually go to any early voting location or any election day voting location and register even on election day, if I'm not mistaken. And if I am, I'm sure I'll get corrected here in a second. You can find those polling places nearest you by going to fox13now.com. And yes, there will be a short quiz later on everything I just told you. But the way we cast our ballots is not the only thing that is different this year. There is a whole host of other things that are different this year, and we're going to get into that on this Town Hall Tuesday, and we're going to take your questions about the election itself. Joining us tonight is Justin Lee to my left, to your left, I guess, to my right. Justin Lee is the Director of Elections in the Lieutenant Governor's Office. And of course, my colleagues here at Fox 13 News, Ben Winslow and Max Roth, both of whom have not just made covering politics their expertise, but actually their way of life.
We don't have what you're saying, Bob.
I didn't say that. Anyway, everyone, thank you so much for being with us. And of course, this is a perfect opportunity for you, our Facebook friends, to get your questions answered as we head into this final week prior to the general election of 2020. We encourage you to list them in the comments section below, and we'll get to as many of them over the next 27 minutes as we can. To get things started, though, Justin, with this new way of voting, election security is a big deal. It's been a big concern. How certain are you of the security of the ballots that have and will be cast? And what measures are in place to protect those ballots?
You know, that's a great question, Bob. I'm going to say I'm very certain about the security of the ballots. You know, we've had already over 500,000 people vote. I'll break some numbers for you tomorrow morning. You're going to see about 620,000 people have voted by the mail. And that's great numbers. That's huge numbers. And those ballots are being verified by the county clerks. They go and check the signature on every single ballot. And the delivery's been working well. You know, Utah County told me about the drop boxes. We haven't had any real major issues through the post office at all. So things are working well, and everything's secure. You know, we've done this before in Utah. This isn't new for us as far as voting by mail. So I'm confident that this will continue to be secure and continue to work well.
Justin, as you mentioned, and Ben and Max, I want you to jump in here because I know you've got plenty of not only insight, but plenty of questions as well. What do you attribute that huge turnout so far? 600,000 votes cast. That's more than a third of all the active voters in Utah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Why are we seeing this?
I think a number of factors. You have a presidential election, which tends to draw a lot of people, just a lot of interest overall in the presidential race. You also have a lot of issues. You've got your congressional races. You've got statewide races that are happening right now. You've got a governor's race, attorney general's race, down ticket from there. And you've got a lot of local races and a lot of big issues that are happening locally. You've got legislature that you've got to vote for. You've got a number of constitutional amendments on the ballot. But I think far and away what's driving the turnout is the presidential race and the big statewide races.
Yeah, and I think that this year also, Ben's absolutely right, and Justin, we were talking about this on Monday for the story then, and you had mentioned that interest whenever you have those high priority races going on, but also, this year with all the talk about voting and voting security and getting your vote counted, I think people are just being extra sensitive to making sure they got all their ducks in a row. I am the worst procrastinator in the world, so my ballot, I still haven't even opened it, and so I need to do that and get it back in. But I think a lot of people are better than I am, and especially this year, they're trying to be careful. Bob, I did notice we had a really good question in. There was a person who was worried about being able to get to an in-person polling location, suggesting that she had heard that she couldn't do that, and that's not the case. Justin, that's not the case, right?
Yeah, that's right. There are in-person locations available during early voting and on election day. Now, what we should tell people is that those locations are not going to be the same as they would have been in prior elections, and a lot of that has to do with the pandemic. We want to keep people distanced. We don't want to have long lines. We don't want to have people in the polling location for a long time. So many of these in-person places are really going to be just giving people paper ballots and having them cast that ballot, drop off the ballot. But they're not going to be voting on machines as much. So while there are in-person opportunities, we're really encouraging people to avoid going to the polls unless you absolutely have to. With our COVID numbers spiking the way they are, we want people to stay safe and stay distant. So if you got that by-mail ballot, Max, get that thing filled out and get that thing turned in, or drop it off at a drop box. Now, if you want to drop it at the polls, that's great. But nobody should expect to go to the polls and have a vastly different experience than they would have by just bringing their by-mail ballot and dropping that off. But to find those locations, you can go to vote.utah.gov, put in your address, and you'll find everything close to you.
Vote.utah.gov is where you go and you put in your address. I did that today, and sure enough, you're right. The polling places in my area are all different from the places that they have been in the past. And so I am curious, Justin, to know, and I guess it may be premature to even ask this, but because of the pandemic and the fact that we're doing things so much differently this year, I wonder how many of the things that we're doing, such as the early voting and the different procedures that we're taking, how much of that is going to stick around once the pandemic is gone?
I think a lot of it will stick around. And the reason is we've done quite a bit of this before. Having a couple of weeks of early voting is the norm here for us. And now some counties have that for 2 full weeks. Some only do 4 days. That's what the law requires. But we'll continue to see vote by mail here as the norm here in Utah. And hopefully that continues to work well. I was concerned in the primary election with the pandemic if we'd have a lower turnout with everything being primarily by mail and only 7 counties having any kind of in-person option. But we didn't. We had a huge turnout. We had 99% of people voting by mail. So I think we're going to see this as our normal here in Utah. And that's probably a good thing. Turnout goes up when we use vote by mail, and that's something we like to see.
Yeah, I was saying when we were talking before, Justin, that I understand I love that process of going to the polls, that tradition and everything. But on the flip side, Bob, I grew up in a judge's family. And every few years, my dad would be on it, and nobody knows who the judges are. And, there'd always be a certain level of nervousness and stuff. And so I'm always thinking, when I would get to the ballot box, I'd feel so guilty about those races that I didn't know enough about. Like I'd realize I hadn't done enough about the school board, or I hadn't done enough about an amendment or a resolution, or a referendum that I really just hadn't focused on at all. And so I love that I have this at home, and I can sit at my computer as a cheat sheet and look all this stuff up and spend some time with it.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, as we filled out, Diane and I and our daughter Stacy all filled out our ballots yesterday and got them in today. And we sat around the kitchen table and did it together. And it gave us an opportunity. I don't think we've ever had that opportunity before, to sit and not only exercise our right as citizens to do that, but to do it together as a family and discuss things as we went down the ballot. I mean, if ever there was a conversation starter, that's it among your adult children. And to have the younger ones watch what we were doing and see, and no, you can't interrupt us right now. We're voting. And that kind of thing. What a unique experience that was for us and our families. So that's really great. We've got a couple of good questions here that I want to get to. Woody Woodmansey. I'm a Draper resident. I was preparing to fill out my ballot 2 days ago. I've been asking around, but I've had no answer yet. First of all, thank you for this forum to ask questions. I guess the question is, and maybe Woody, you're asking, you don't know who to vote for, maybe? I know there's a long string of judges on all of the ballots. Justin, what do you do about that? Ben, what do you do about that?
Could I take this one? I know I just talked. Here's the reason. Even though I'm the name you didn't say, that same dad, he just barely stepped off he was the chair of JPEC, which is the Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission. And they do so much work all the time where people are going in, volunteers are going in and looking at how the judges do their work, and they're surveying lawyers and everything. So go to their site. I think it's judges.utah.gov. Is that right, Justin? I'm going to show
you. Exactly right.
Proud of my dad, darn it. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's really easy to look up how those judges are doing. There's a ton of information.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ben.
I just wanted to go to one other question that I do think is one that I get asked quite frequently is how soon can Utah start validating mail-in and early votes? This is by Reed Belk, and this is one I get asked constantly. And what happens is when you turn in your ballot, it is scanned, and by law it's scanned and stored, but the results are not tabulated until the polls close on election night. So when you look and check the status of your mail-in ballot, which you can do in Utah, what you're seeing is it'll say, your ballot's been processed, your ballot's been received. Your ballot's been received, which means the clerk has it. Your ballot's been processed means that it's been opened, the signature's been verified, and it's been scanned. But your results, you won't know the results until polls close election night.
And, I think that's really important because in several states, they can't begin processing these ballots until election day. And so that's made a lot of national media. Here in Utah, we start processing the ballots as soon as we get them. So we've been processing ballots for 2 weeks now. So we'll have a lot more results ready to go on election night than you may see in some states that can't start processing until election day.
So when you say you're processing them, what does that mean exactly? Because if you're not actually counting them, what are you doing to them?
So we're doing several things, and Ben hit most of them there. We're opening up the signatures, and the county clerks are verifying the signature on the envelope to the signature that we have on file in the database. And then once that's done, the envelope is separated from the ballot. And at that point, we have no way of tying that ballot back to that envelope. It's a secret vote. And then it goes through the machine, so they can actually run it through the counting machine. But the functionality, and this is kind of nuanced, but the functionality to actually tabulate and aggregate the votes is not enabled yet. So nobody knows the totals. Nobody has any idea what those totals are. But those ballots have been run through the machine and they're ready to go. In some counties, they just have the ballots in stacks and ready to go for election day. But that's the processing. So it's verifying the signature, opening them, separating them, then running them through the machines.
All four of us, gentlemen, are going to be very involved on election day 1 week from today. We're going to be, and I'm sure, Justin, you're going to be burning the midnight oil, overseeing whatever it is you oversee on election day. But the three of us are going to be covering the results, whatever results those are. Can you give us some kind of idea how many returns we're going to have, and how and whether we're going to be able to call races on election night after the polls close?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, here's the carrot that I will throw out there. The more people that vote early, the more results we'll have. So if everybody votes, in the next few days, gets those ballots in, we will have a lot more results. That being said, usually we actually have about 75 to 80% of results on election night. But we have seen, and this isn't new here in Utah, And actually, let me back up. They will be released starting at 8 o'clock, which I know for Fox 13 is a good thing.
We're grateful.
Amen.
But results will be out there at 8 o'clock, starting at least. But for very close races, and we've seen this in the past, you look at the 4th Congressional District since it's existed, the governor's race back in June, it may take a couple days to get full results and for anyone to be able to call those races. And I should note one more thing. We never call races. That's the media that calls races. For us, nothing is official until 2 weeks after the election, when all of the counties finally certify their results. But again, vote now, and we'll have way better results on election night than if people wait.
Talk to us a little bit about the absentee ballots and the provisional ballots that you're going to have to go back and figure out what to do with. I mean, do you anticipate having more of them this year because of the new way of doing things?
We don't really distinguish between absentee ballots and by-mail ballots at this point. There's very few voters that the distinction matters at all, since everyone gets that ballot. Now, provisional ballots, I think, and I might be wrong, but I think we're going to have fewer provisional ballots than we have seen in the past. And that's because our voter registration numbers are so high. We've added over 250,000 people since the first of the year. And those are the type of people that usually show up at the polls because they didn't get a ballot, because they haven't registered. And our registration numbers are so high, I don't think we'll see as many provisional ballots. But the number of provisional ballots we ultimately see is not usually that high. It doesn't take that much time when we're already verifying so many by-mail ballots. So I don't expect that to be vastly different. I'm hoping it's a little bit less than we've seen in the past.
Let's see, Steve Barnes. Why does it take so long for some precincts to report the results after the polls close?
That's a really good question. Well, I'll pick on one. San Juan County is a great example. They have to drive about 3 hours in San Juan County to get from the polling place back to the county clerk's office where they're tabulating results. And then others, it comes down to distance. It comes down to how many people are online at 8 o'clock and if they still need to vote. And then just the people they have on hand to process things. So a whole host of factors, but that's why we keep releasing results all night long.
You mean there isn't a way to electronically transmit that stuff in San Juan County as opposed to driving it all the way to the county seat?
That's a great question. And sure, there are ways to do it from a technology perspective, but from a security perspective, we do not want to transmit this stuff online, and we never do. All of our systems are what we call air gapped. You're pulling like a USB out of one machine and driving it physically to another location, plugging it in, because we don't want anyone to be able to hack these. We don't want them connected to the internet. That would be a security risk. So it is important to have that gapping and have that disconnect.
Interesting. Hey, I did notice, Bob, we did get a question from Woody, who we'd mentioned before, and that one was about why McAdams and versus Owens is not on his ballot. He lives in Draper, and the reason is I'm guessing that John that the race for the 3rd congressional district is on your ballot. I'm not too far from you, and that's the district that I live in. And so to vote for Owens and McAdams, you would have to live in the 4th district, which encompasses much of western Salt Lake County and goes through into Utah County, and I think even part of San Pete County, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, that's so it's just there are those borderlines, and it's kind of strange in a state like Utah because there's so few competitive congressional races in the whole country that's one of them that draws millions and millions of dollars, and you see endless commercials about it. And those commercials are aimed at 1/4 of Utahns, and you and I are not part of that 1/4.
Yeah, so Woody, if you want to vote in the McAdams-Owens race, you better move to the 4th district and register there really fast. or else you're going to miss it, man. You're going to miss it. You know, we bring up that 4th congressional race. Why is it so contentious? I mean, and Max, you mentioned the great interest on the national level. $12 million is what we reported today has been poured into that race, and a lot of that you're seeing on the air. Ben, talk to us about why that race, the 4th race, is so contentious.
Well, it was really designed to be that way. 10 years ago, we did redistricting, which is after the census, by population estimates, you redraw the boundaries for legislature, congressional districts, and things like that. And there were a lot of discussions about the boundaries for all of this. And that's how you got the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th congressional districts. And we got that 4th congressional district because of the population shifts. So that when they designed it, it takes as Max said, it takes a portion of Salt Lake County, it takes a portion of Utah County, it goes down into a little bit of San Pete County, and it creates that a little bit more of a competitive thing because you have different demographics that vote differently in these areas. And so it makes it a little more of a swing district than you would see in other parts of the state, where the 2nd congressional district is another one where definitely Salt Lake County, what we've noticed is voting trends. Salt Lake County tends to vote a little more Democratic, but then the rest of the state offsets that because it votes more Republican. And then you have districts like the 1st congressional district and the 3rd congressional district, which are overwhelmingly Republican voting districts.
Here's another question from Steve Barnes. What happens if I vote early for a candidate who later drops out of the race or whose candidacy is invalidated due to some sort of election violation? Is my vote thrown away on that candidate?
Unfortunately, basically, yes. I try to think of a better way of saying that, but there's really not a better way of saying that. It doesn't happen a lot. You know, we don't generally see people dropping out of races this close to an election. The only way someone really gets kicked off the ballot at this point is if they fail to file their campaign finance report, which is due tonight. And even that is less difficult than it used to be because we have a 24-hour grace period. So the answer is basically yes, but it happens very infrequently. The race, or I guess the election where it matters more, is the presidential election. Back in March, we had our Super Tuesday presidential primary. And as we all know, you have candidates dropping out left and right in those races. So it becomes a little more problematic in that kind of a race, but it's not as much of a problem generally in a general election.
You know, it's and there's there are lines with different states. Utah started sending out their ballots, I think, on the 13th. And so by the time it arrives at people's homes, you've got about 2 weeks until the election. I think North Carolina started mid-September. You know, so you know, it's I totally get what you're saying, Steve. Your point makes sense. There's always this tug of war between practicality and wanting to be you know, meticulous about the timing, but I guess there's a middle ground, and we tend to be kind of on the side of starting pretty close to the election.
I'd be interested in, and anybody, Ben, Max, or Justin, or any one of our Facebook friends, if we know the answer to this, but that is how closely the undecided numbers correlate with the number of people who have yet to vote. And is there any way to know that?
I think you've stumped us all.
The numbers correlate in what way? The number.
So there's like you, Max. You're sitting there, haven't voted yet, but my guess is that you probably made up your mind about who you want to vote for at this point.
You know, there are a lot of things that I still honestly. That's part of why I haven't. Really thinking. I mean, I've thought about it to a degree, but there are a lot of things on this ballot.
So, which brings me then to the next point, and that is, Justin, for those folks who are used to voting on election day, and just, you know, we're still a week out, and an awful lot can happen in this next week. And for folks like me, and I don't know, Ben, you've cast your vote yet, or Justin, whether you have, But I know of the 600,000 Utahns who have already cast their vote, a lot can happen in this last week. And all of a sudden, hey, wait a minute, I want to retract my vote, you know, but you can't do that. So,
you know, what's funny, Bob, is there are actually some states where they do allow you to change your mind. And Justin, I'm sorry to say, I can't imagine the headache, but they actually let people go in and do that. Say, hey, I voted, but now I want to, you know, take that away and change. But here's the thing. I mean, you think about the modern world we live in, where we know what happened in Washington, D.C. or Honolulu immediately. When people were voting in 1800 for Thomas Jefferson, although it was more like, you know, not many people got to vote then, but you had no idea what had happened 50 miles away, let alone, 500 miles away. And so you were voting in a vacuum of information just based on what you were aware of at the time. I mean, I think we know a whole lot more now than we have in history at any point.
I think, though, it is worth pointing out, despite all this, if you do have questions about what is on the ballot, there are a lot of constitutional amendments that are on the ballot. And I know that a lot of people have questions about what those exactly mean. The voter information guide is available online, and it is very helpful. And Justin, can you kind of direct people toward that voter information guide?
And again, I'm going to say go to vote.utah.gov. And even quicker than tracking down the whole voter information guide, just click on the button that says what's on my ballot, or it says candidates and issues. Put in your address and you'll get a sample ballot with everything that's on your specific ballot. And then we've got information on each one of those 7 constitutional amendments, local school board, links directly to the judges. So all of that information is there. So Max, if you're not sure what you're going to vote on yet, go there, put in your address. Your exact sample ballot will come up and you can get info on all of those.
I'm going to. There are always things that, I mean, I focus on this thing obsessively, and there are always things that I miss when I get to the ballot.
Well, and I think as we're getting close and the clock is winding down, gentlemen, I'd like to go around and each one of us give us some idea as to your personal and professional feelings toward this election and the importance thereof. Let's start with you, Justin.
I mean, every election is very important. I mean, I have the cool job that I get to facilitate democracy, make sure that everyone gets to vote. And that makes a lot of big decisions on who our representatives are, who the leaders are, changes to the Constitution. So absolutely want everyone to go out and vote. I think Utah makes it about as easy as any state to have your vote counted, to have your voice heard. So please go vote. And during this pandemic, let's stay safe. So use the drop boxes, use USPS, drop off that ballot on election day. We want everyone to vote, but we want everyone to do it safely.
Ben?
I think the advice I would give everybody is make sure that you are up to speed on what is on your ballot, who's on your ballot. Take the time, research it, visit the voter information guide, to make those informed decisions, and check it out. It's some helpful resources, particularly when it comes to some of these races that are down ballot that you may not know a lot about.
Okay, Max.
I think for me, it's clearly, if you're watching this, you really care about the process. God bless you for caring about the process. And I think the other thing to do is just realize when you're in there voting, when we political reporters have the great privilege of kind of getting to meet so many of the people involved. And yeah, there's some human failing and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's not a question of good and evil. It's a question of disagreements, and so it's care, but realize that that there are people on every side who are really just in it, hoping that they can help people, and until someone shows you evidence that their motives are bad, you can believe they're good, even if you totally disagree with them.
as we were filling out our ballots last night and yesterday, and as I was reflecting on that tremendous privilege that we are granted as citizens of this country, I thought to myself, here's one vote. Here's my vote. This is my vote. This is the way I feel about things. Private, of course. But as I did so, I felt this tremendous empowerment that colored the way I approached this whole thing. Like you, Max, and Ben and Justin, I know all of you are tremendously serious about this privilege to vote and taking it very seriously and considering everything that you can consider on each one of the measures, because it all counts. And I would say my parting shot here is, don't give this election or your ballot short shrift. The privilege that we all have to cast that ballot really, really means something. I mean, a tremendous amount of blood has been spilled to ensure that each one of us get to voice our opinion and get to choose our leaders and select the issues that are important to us. And I would encourage everyone, if you haven't voted yet, make sure you take the time before you vote to go over everything on the ballot. Make sure you understand what you're voting for. Look up those judicial reviews and see how each one of those judges on the ballot rate in those judicial reviews, and then vote accordingly. I would encourage all of us to take this election tremendously seriously, so that each one of our vote really does count. And Justin, my hat is off to you for everything that you and the people in your office, see, I'm not wearing a hat, are doing to make sure that this election goes forward the way it should go forward, according to constitutional law, both on the federal and state level. And we can't thank you enough for all the hard work that you have done and all the work that you will do in this last week running up to the election. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time to be part of this Town Hall Tuesday on the Fox 13 Facebook page. We encourage you again to get out and vote. If not in person on election day, do it now. Get that ballot filled out and get it in the mail or into those drop boxes so that your vote counts. Thanks again, everybody. We really appreciate you being part of Town Hall Tuesday. Thank you, all of our Facebook friends, for your thoughtful questions and your attentiveness during these last 30 minutes. We're sorry for the questions we weren't able to answer, but we encourage you to seek out answers for those questions on your own. Thanks again, everybody. We will see you on Fox 13 News at 9 tonight. And gentlemen, thanks again for being with us.
Thank you.